In this exciting episode, Perry's got his hands full with a fire-setting caretaker. Sure, the man's a firebug, but he's no murderer. He's a cat lover after all. We'll find out all about it in Season 2, Episode 19 of Perry Mason, The Case of the Caretaker's Cat. Pod. I'm your humble host, Jonathan Searcy, and my purpose here is pretty simple: provide an audio companion to the greatest legal drama in television history, Perry Mason. I plan to do a pod for every episode of the television series, and as time permits, I'll look at some of those made-for-TV movies too. I'll be working through the series in the order in which the episodes were aired. Each episode I'll give a brief refresher on the plot, and if the episode was based on a novel, I'll compare the book with its television adaptation. Next, I'll list some key pieces of trivia, as well as tackle the episode's main theme. We'll feature a Perry Proverb, a moment of wisdom from the man himself, and then we'll finish with a post-case water cooler, where just like Perry, Della, and Paul, we can rehash the ins and outs of their adventures. But first, to the law library! Each episode in the Law Library, we return to prior cases to refresh our memories about Perry's past, so we can find fresh precedents for future cases. This episode features a standard Perry figure, the eccentric rich man. In the case of the caretaker's cat, that rich man's name is Peter Baxter. Of course, he's got younger relatives who want to inherit his money, and therein lies the motive for murder. Baxter actually dies in this episode, and his will goes into probate, a process of establishing a will's validity.
I drew up Mr. Baxter's last will and testament, the one now offered in probate.
This is something new in the Perry legal world, but it does remind us what people do when they want someone's cash. If you're connected to bogeyman Martin Wellman, you'll wonder what it all means when he rewrites his will.
I'm leaving my entire estate, property and money, to the people who have done the most for me. The Hartford Medical Foundation.
But, Uncle Martin, what about me?
If you're a disgruntled wife, you kill your husband to get the insurance money. See, for instance, the case of the fugitive nurse.
Why should he be entitled to a half interest? He was no good to me alive. I figured he might be worth something dead.
If you're a disgruntled cousin, you frame a schnook of a husband for his wife's murder so you can inherit your dead cousin's cash. See, the case of the fiery fingers.
Until the day she died, I was nothing but a poor relative. She wore her money like some kind of a badge. A badge I could never have. It was my one chance to be free, don't you understand? To be paid back for the years I'd given her.
And if you're a bitter and resentful ex-wife, you let your husband's will never go to probate so that, well, I'm not really sure what Florence Harvey is up to in the case of the romantic rogue. Let's just say that things with her late husband's will don't get as far as they do in this episode. Which brings us to a final comment on the probated will in the case of the caretaker's cat. The attorney for Peter Baxter, one Gordon T. Rowland, turns out to be on the up and up and pretty competent at his job. That is odd in the Perry world. Not too many other attorneys in Perry Mason's Los Angeles are worth the time or money they ask of you as a client. Since Perry typically only wants your business if something serious like a murder is involved, you might want to check out Gordon T. if you're in need of a will. Now, let's get to the plot of this episode. The case of the caretaker's cat. So Peter Baxter is old, and bedridden, but he's got a lot of cash. While his granddaughter Winifred Oakley plays piano downstairs in his stately mansion, his two grandnephews stand around and smoke and cast weary eyes towards Baxter's nurse, Edith DeVoe. Then there's Baxter's caretaker, one James Hing, who's getting lots of Baxter's cash out of the bank and then provocatively setting his boss's mansion ablaze. Maybe it's all those brass instruments he keeps around. That horn section is on fire. Anywho, the Baxter will doesn't quite churn out the way Stuart and Kenneth Baxter think it should. And Mr. Hing, he's carrying his cat all the way to the bank, baby.
I hereby bequeath and devise the rest and remainder of my estate, both real and personal, to James Hing, my caretaker.
Hing!
The next time we see Mr. Hing, he's in Perry's office seeking legal help. Here's Della's read on the caretaker.
He seems a curious mixture.
Of what, Della?
Of a man not quite sure of himself, yet knowing exactly what he wants and quietly getting it.
The offending volatile spirits used to light Baxter's house on fire end up in the office of one Douglas Keene. Keene is the strong-jawed, gym coach hair-having significant other of Winifred Oakley, the only Baxter heir not protesting the will. She prefers love to money and gives Keene the what for when he urges her to go for the cash.
The money seems to mean so much to you.
It does.
More than we mean to each other.
Well, I guess I got kind of wound up, didn't I? I'm sorry, honey. You do what you think is best.
Mr. Hing, meanwhile, spends his nights digging for a suitcase full of cash in the Baxter backyard while Tragg and his gang of cops look on. Next thing you know, Mr. Hing is making a late-night call to Perry from the jail in need of even more legal help.
But I must see him before 11 o'clock. It is very important, Miss Street. Everything depends on it.
Well, I'll see what I can do. Where can he reach you?
At police headquarters. They are holding me for murder.
It appears that Hing did commit the crime of lighting the house on fire, but his intention was not to kill his boss. Peter Baxter intended to test his heirs to see which of them would contest the will that awarded all of his money to Mr. Hing. Only someone killed Baxter before the blaze was set, leaving Hing holding the offending match and a murder charge. Perry goes to the press to get the heirs working against one another. He has Paul Drake plant a story about a new will.
What story do you want planted?
That there's a frantic investigation going on regarding a later will, dated after the one entered for probate.
I'll tell the press the rumor comes from an unimpeachable source.
Thank you.
And sure enough, in pop Stuart and Kenneth to snitch on each other about stepping out with Edith DeVoe.
He and that nurse Edith DeVoe have been seeing each other on the sly. I happen to know that my cousin Stuart and Edith DeVoe, my grandfather's nurse, were awfully chummy.
For her part, Edith only expresses sympathy for Winifred Oakley.
The only person who really cared for him, Winifred Oakley. It's a tough break for her.
Perry makes it clear that arson wasn't the only way Baxter could have died. A sedative could have acted on Baxter's body like poison. That, of course, leaves only a few suspects. There's Hilliard, the bank manager and executor of the will. He's certainly suspicious, but only because he happens to know what Baxter was working on the entire time. A test of his heirs that said if they protested the will, they'd be cut out. Then there's Stuart Baxter. Well, it seems like he's on the up and up.
We checked on Stuart Baxter. He did not leave the theater during intermission.
Edith DeVoe? Well, after being identified by her nurse's cap by a dispensary guard, it's clear she knows a little too much about what's going on. She's bouncing back and forth, shifting blame from one person to the next. Perry breaks her on the stand.
The afternoon I spoke with you, I told you about a test will and the plot between Hing and Peter Baxter. Now, you were the only one I told about this so-called test. Yet when Kenneth Baxter appeared on the stand, he knew all about it. How, Miss DeVoe? How would he know about it if you hadn't told him? It's Kenneth Baxter you've been in love with, is it not? And it was Kenneth Baxter who left the theater that night during intermission.
That's not so. It wasn't Kenneth. I had nothing to do with him. Oh.
In a line that's filled with import, but whose reality we never get to see, Kenneth confesses his crime this way.
The afternoon I spoke with you, I told you about a test will and the plot between Hing and Peter Baxter. Now, you were the only one I told about this so-called test. Yet when Kenneth Baxter appeared on the stand, he knew all about it. How, Miss DeVoe? How would he know about it if you hadn't told him? It's Kenneth Baxter you've been in love with, is it not? And it was Kenneth Baxter who left the theater that night during intermission.
That's not so. It wasn't Kenneth. I had nothing to do with him. Oh.
As for Mr. Hing, he's got his cat and the satisfaction that he never portrayed his boss.
At the end, he was like a sick eagle. He was strong and fierce all his life. And yet, through this whole thing, I felt like I was protecting him.
Plus, if you're into setting fires, you're really not going to get a chance like this arson experience again. Cross that one off the bucket list, Mr. Hing. The Case of the Caretaker's Cat has an interesting adaptation history. The novel of the same name came out in 1935, and I'll talk more about it in a minute. It's worth noting the book was adapted before this 1960 episode in 1936 as the fifth Warner Brothers Perry Mason film. It was the first to feature Ricardo Cortez as Perry Mason instead of Warren William, and the film was faithful to the book, something that cannot be said of the television episode, and you might recognize Ricardo Cortez as the man who plays Sam Spade in the first adaptation of The Maltese Falcon, 1931, 10 years before Humphrey Bogart made the role his own. Okay, let's count the umpteen ways that the novel The Caretaker's Cat differs from the television adaptation. Number one, the setup with the cat, totally different. As the novel opens, Perry gets visited by a lame caretaker whose boss has just died in a fire. The problem, the heirs don't like the cat and want to kill it, and the caretaker wants Perry to protect the cat. The cat never plays that big of a role in the television episode. Number two, in the book, the eccentric rich man named Peter Laxter survives the fire. He makes the same plan as in the show, but instead of getting hoisted by his own petard, he actually substitutes the body of a terminally ill man. More about him soon. Number three, Perry doesn't initially suspect foul play with a swap body, but he does suspect that somebody did the old man in before the fire got to him. Why? Edith DeVoe, the nurse, says she saw Samuel Laxter, who's basically the equivalent of Stuart from the television episode, hooking up a hose pipe to his car exhaust so that he could feed carbon monoxide into the old man's room. Number four, which means in the novel, Perry tips off Hamilton Berger about apparent foul play in the death of Peter Laxter. And he's proven correct. We see Perry and Hamilton working as a team. Kind of incredible. Number five, the nighttime digger. It's not the caretaker, but is in fact our murderer, the equivalent of Kenneth Baxter, who's named Frank Oafley. Oh, he's an oaf in the episode. In the novel, the key missing item is the supposed dead man's diamonds, which were buried out back, not a suitcase full of cash. And Ophley is digging for them when Perry and the cops catch him. Number 6, Winifred is the heir left out in the cold, just like in the show, and Douglas Keene is her boyfriend. But here's a complication. The will, which gave no money to Winifred, got rid of a boyfriend who only wanted Winifred for her cash and showed Douglas Keene to be the true boyfriend. And 2, Winifred's a businesswoman. She runs a waffle shop. Number 7, the caretaker gets murdered. So he's not the client in the novel because he gets got. And the cat looks like the sole witness. Number 8, Perry hides the cat named Clinker in the novel with Della. Number 9, Edith DeVoe gets murdered. She can't go on the stand to out the real murderer because she herself gets got with the caretaker's crutch. And who gets charged with both crimes? Douglas Keene. Perry's client in the novel is Douglas Keene, not the caretaker. Number 10, there's another attorney in the novel named Nathaniel Schuster, a.k.a. Shyster. And that guy is no Gordon T. Number 11, did I mention that Perry pretends he's gotten married to Della, and there's multiple scenes with the pair pretending to be man and wife? Perry, Della, shippers unite. And number 12, in the trial, Perry proves it's Frank Ophley who killed the caretaker, and that it was the still alive Peter Laxter who killed Edith DeVoe. Oh my goodness. It's an absolutely crazy novel with romance, double crosses, court sequences, waffle eating, and Perry's philosophizing. Dig, if you will, this passage. Quote, "What can a man lose? He can't lose his life because he doesn't own that anyway. He only has a lease on it. He can lose money, and money doesn't mean a thing as compared with character. All that really counts is a man's ability to live, to get the most out of it as he goes through it, and he gets the most kick out of it by playing a no-limit game." Perry is all in a Dabo Sweeney before the fact. Paul, for one, is convinced that Perry is a homespun philosophizer. But if you never read a Perry novel before and you want to see what kind of task the writers of the television show bit off for themselves when they went to adapt one of those 1930s suckers, pick up The Case of the Caretaker's Cat and take a look at it. As it is, I'll say this. The teleplay writers don't give us any kind of evidence of the "I've never gotten away with anything in my whole life," the line that Kenneth leaves us with at the episode's end, but neither does the book, considering the defendant in the show was the murder victim in the book. Teleplay writers managed to make things seem somewhat coherent. Whew. Now, let's get trivial, shall we? Each episode in our trivia section, I give you 3 takeaways. A Paul is a subject worth investigating more. Adela is something about a particular actor or actress in the episode. And a Perry is something we learn about our intrepid hero. Our Paul. The case turns when a nurse orderly, one Nurse Watson, identifies Edith DeVoe hanging out in a hospital dispensary where she doesn't belong. Why did DeVoe stand out? Nurse Watson says it's her cap.
Don't all nurses wear caps?
Yes, sir. But each school of nursing has its own distinctive cap, and a nurse graduating from an institution will wear its cap for the rest of her professional life, no matter where she may work.
I see.
So here's this episode's Paul prompt. Is this really a thing? Is this a thing that the television show writers made up? Was it a thing back in the 50s? Is it a thing now? Do nurses in certain stations wear colors that would indicate the school they attended? Ardella, for this episode, focuses on none other than John Agar, Mr. Shirley Temple himself, our murderer, Kenneth Baxter.
It's occurred to me that we could get together with profit on this whole business, will or no will, and come to some mutually satisfactory arrangement.
Agar was born in Chicago in 1921. He served admirably in World War II After the war, he married Shirley Temple, America's sweetheart, in 1945. He was 24, fresh meat for David O. Selznick, the independent producer who signed him to a movie deal, and his initial roles were promising, including parts alongside John Wayne in many of John Ford's movies, including Fort Apache, She Wore a Yellow Ribbon. Those were all in the 1940s, but by 1949, his marriage to Shirley Temple was over, and he was stuck at Universal doing science fiction pictures like Return of the Creature, which was the sequel to Creature from the Black Lagoon that no one asked for, and The Mole People. His 1960 appearance in this episode of Perry Mason marked a kind of dividing line. Up until then, Agar had been doing B pictures for a relatively major studio, but his 1960s work was even lower grade, featuring titles like Journey to the Seventh Planet, Women of the Prehistoric Planet, Xantar, The Thing from Venus, forgettable pictures all. According to the very candid Agar, many of his films were not so much released, quote, as escaped. The dude did find love with his second marriage in 1950 to Loretta Barnett, a dancing girl in 1941's Citizen Kane, with whom John remained married until Loretta's death in 2000. Agar died in 2002, the father of 3 children, 1 with Temple, 2 with Loretta. Go, John, go. In this particular episode, as we look at our Perry, we learn that our intrepid hero will let clients go if he has to. Early in his defense of Mr. Hing, it becomes clear that Hing won't tell Perry the complete truth. That Perry will not abide. Perry won't play that way and lets Mr. Hing know he should look for another attorney.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mason.
So am I. Very sorry. Under the circumstances, I think perhaps you'd better find other counsel.
But if Mr. Hing remained cagey because of his loyalty to Mr. Baxter, Perry too prizes loyalty and ends up remaining loyal to Mr. Hing in spite of his initial deception. And that's as great a segue as we can muster to talk about this episode's theme, loyalty. It's the subject of conversation as the episode ends.
Why did you say you did not know what was in the envelope?
I was not at liberty to do so, Mr. Mason.
In other words, Peter Baxter didn't want his heirs to know that if anyone contested the will, they'd be cut off.
Yes, it was a test of loyalty.
Mr. Baxter was testing the loyalty of his potential heirs. Only Winifred stayed true. Della points out that this means Mr. Hing stayed loyal to Mr. Baxter as well, even when that loyalty clashed with his commitment to Perry and threatened to keep him behind bars.
I went to tell Dr. Keene not to force Miss Winifred to join Stewart and Kenneth in contesting the will.
But you couldn't tell him.
No, I couldn't.
So you were loyal to Peter Baxter too, Mr. Hing. All along, all the way.
But what of the loyalty of 2 peripheral characters? That can shed some light on this key theme. First, we look at the loyalty of Douglas Keene. In the novel, Keene shows his loyalty to Winifred by sticking with her even when she gets shut out of the will. In the television adaptation, his loyalty to her or the money remains in doubt. I guess at the end, we believe he's been convinced that love matters more than cash. And of course, he gets to have the cash too because Winifred inherits. But what about our other loyal character, Edith DeVoe? This is a woman so devoted to Kenneth that she compromises her professional oaths to help him get his hands on some cash. In the end, she can't do enough to keep him free. And I gotta say, if you're silly enough to grant John Agar your loyalty, I gotta think you deserve everything that's coming to you. Which is to say this, it's not loyalty per se that counts. It's who you are loyal to. And I'd stay loyal to Perry if I were y'all. Now, let's hear a Perry proverb. We've seen Perry lay it on the line with clients before, and early in this episode, his client already behind bars, Perry addresses Mr. Hing with what should be a motto for attorney-client relations.
You asked me to represent you, Mr. Hing. I can't do that without your complete confidence.
Perry can't get Mr. Hing to budge, but Mr. Hing's loyalty to his boss, ironically, is what marks him for praise at the end of the episode. Perry's only addition to this statement should be that he's always trying to do right by the people who have taken him into their confidence. He won't steer you wrong, caretakers of the world. You can trust him with your cats and your lives. Now, let's grab a swig from the water cooler.
There is one thing I don't understand. Go on, Paul.
Our research prompt from the last episode involved the real-life analog for the Bryant Halsey account. You know, the bubbly soap maker who made a deal with royal dope Charlie Goff and sold our man Danny Ross down the river.
I just got the Bryant Halsey account. On my mother's grave, $8 million bubbly bucks.
We had a couple different people email in candidates. My Aunt Myra found that Colgate, Palmolive, and Procter & Gamble were soap competitors for a long time, including the 1950s. My mother also pointed out that Procter & Gamble could be a good candidate for the real-life Bryant Halsey. Procter & Gamble opened business in 1837. And in doing some research, I fell down the rabbit hole of famous Procter & Gamble products. They introduced Tide in 1946. They worked on Downy fabric softener in 1960, the year this episode came out. And they also introduced Clorox, the leading American manufacturer of liquid bleach, in the 1950s. My dad pointed out that a soap manufacturing outfit, Purex, sponsored episodes of Perry Mason's first season. That's right. Odd episodes from episodes 1 through 25 of season 1 of Perry were actually sponsored by a soap outfit, and they specialized in bleach and dry detergent. Super fascinating. Thank you for that deep dive. I also heard from Tim in Fort Collins, who had a follow-up thought on the HBO Perry Mason series. In the final episode, we discover that Della is working on a law degree so she can pass the bar. We also know from earlier episodes that she's friends with Hamilton Berger. Tim points out that the first female lawyer in California died in 1934, which in the world of the show is the very year Della should pass the bar exam. Her name was Clara Foltz, and she was the first female assistant district attorney in LA. Tim points out that this could be a model for the show writers to use as they look at Della's future. Love that tip, Tim. As always, I'd love feedback about this particular episode or the podcast in general. Was there something about the episode you'd like to comment on or correct? You can email me at theperrypod@gmail.com. You'll find the link in the show notes. All Perry Pod episodes are available via Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes. Thanks so much for joining me on this pod journey. Join us next time as Perry gets involved with the man of the cloth, and we get a chance to answer a question I've often wondered. Just what denomination is Perry? High Church Anglican? Missouri Synod Lutheran? Most likely, we'll see him at the Court of Justice in The Case of the Stuttering Bishop. Join me, won't you? Until then, this is Jonathan Searcy saying, keep on walking that Park Avenue beat!